listener production.
Hey, Bension Siebert here. Welcome to the briefing. The government wants to do something about how long you're waiting for the toilet. We've all been to a festival or a gig or some big public event where the line for the women's bathroom is ridiculously long, and the men just seem to glide in and out with no problem at all. The Australian Building Codes Board sets the standards for how many bathrooms there have to be in any new Australian building and how they have to be divided by gender. Right now, the board is considering increasing the ratio of female to male public toilets to 1.8 to 1 in certain large buildings. That means for the first time, new auditoriums, theatres or cinemas across Australia would be required to have almost double the number of toilets for women as for men. Now, everyone has their pet theories as to why women's bathroom lines are so long. What are women doing in there? No one knows, and it's impossible to say. But one person who has a pretty good idea is Katherine Webber. She's a public toilet researcher and a Churchill Fellow. Katherine, welcome to the briefing. Do women actually spend more time waiting for the bathroom?
Women use the toilets a lot more frequently for a variety of different reasons, partly because of our biology. We're often menstruating, there could be pregnancy involved. Also, sometimes we have some bladders. It can take longer to use the toilet as well. We need to sit down to pee, need to go into a cubicle each time. Often our clothing can restrict how we go to the toilet. And then we might also be carrying bags or we're traveling with children or older people. So we've got a variety of different reasons that make us go to the toilet more often and use them for longer, which can often lead to us queuing and spending more time in the toilets.
Is part of it also about urinals in the sense that it just takes a lot less time to unzip, not to put too fine a point on it, than to go into the cubicle, sit down, shut the door, do all that?
Definitely. I do think urinals are a lot easier to use. There's no doors and there's less clothing that is involved in using urinals. So yes, they can be a lot more efficient and quicker to use.
Could you just tell us about the current rules and regulations for public bathrooms for men and women in Australia?
So when we have a new building is governed by the building code, and the building code sets the number of toilets that need to be provided, and it breaks it down into men and women. So we do have sex segregated spaces in that building code. The building code then breaks it down to the number of toilets required for men and for women, and also for accessibility.
And what's the ratio of men's to women's toilets that's required under the minimum standards?
So the ratio depends on the number of people using the space. It's quite a detailed table that I don't have in front of me, but it does generally provide for more facilities for men because urinals take up less space than cubicles.
Some people listening to this might be silently thinking men and women should just have the same number of toilets. What do you say to that?
Women spend more time using toilets and spend longer in the toilets. So there's actually a need to provide more toilets for women. There is still the need for some people to have the sex or gender segregated toilets, but there's also the potential to provide gender neutral toilets that anybody can use as long as they've got the right facilities, the right inclusions in them as well.
Speaking of, how does the building code address the needs of gender diverse Australians?
So at present, it's not included in the building code. So there has recently been a proposal to allow gender neutral toilets as an acceptable solution, but that has not yet passed. If the building owner wants to provide gender neutral toilets for a new building, they often need to get a building certified that will sign off on gender neutral toilets as an acceptable solution to meet the requirements of the building code.
An acceptable solution to what?
So when a new building is built, it needs to meet the numbers identified in the building code, and that is only allowed for men and female toilets. So you can get a building certifier that says actually providing gender neutral toilets will be an acceptable solution, which will still meet the requirements of the building code, but in an alternative way.
Is there something stopping businesses just making all their bathrooms gender neutral? Would that not be the best solution?
I think there's a few challenges to that. One is user expectations. Some people don't want to share a toilet, and can be very valid reasons for doing that. Toilets can also, in addition to meeting basic bodily functions of urination and defecation, they can also be places where people have some time out, can go to recompose themselves. It's really important that other features are included in toilets, such as bins for continence and menstruation products. So just by changing the label on the door is not going to meet those additional needs. So you can have a male toilet that has urinals and cubicles. Just by putting gender neutral on it doesn't make it an accessible space. You actually need to reconfigure the design of the building.
Does part of this come down to land and money because of the different space that urinals take up compared to the space that a cubicle takes up?
Once buildings are constructed, they're really hard to retrofit and really expensive. So yes, once you've got a building that's already there, it's really hard to make changes. I think with new buildings, we can rethink about how we can design spaces that are inclusive for more people. But I think ultimately it does come down to what the building is built for and how much people want to spend on it. But I think what's really important to remember is that public toilets form part of the human rights framework to water and sanitation. We all need to use a public toilet when we're out and about. And so by changing our thought process around public toilets is something we want to avoid, something that's really expensive, to actually these are really essential features that really allow people to enjoy the space and stay out longer. Hopefully we can change conversation from public toilets being expensive to a really valuable space in our public spaces.
What, in your mind, is kind of the absolute utopia when it comes to public toilets? How do other countries deal with this?
I love thinking about what a public toilet utopia might be. And I think it's when people can find a public toilet that they can use in a really short amount of time, knowing where one is, knowing that it's going to be open, that it's safe, that it's clean. That is the utopia. It seems really simple, but it's just making sure that when people need a toilet, they can get to one.
But like, for example, there's places in Europe where there are open air urinals. Are there novel solutions elsewhere in the world that Australia isn't using right now?
Yeah, so the open air urinals are great for a portion of the population, but there's a portion of the population that cannot use them. There are some companies that are doing female urinals, which I've yet to try, but would love to. What I'd love to see is our local governments, the people responsible for our public spaces, is thinking about how people use the spaces and planning toilets accordingly rather than adding them in at the end or cutting them out of the budget because they're too expensive to provide.
Well, Katherine Webber, this has been fascinating. Thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Happy to talk toilets anytime.
Public toilet researcher and Churchill Fellow Katherine Webber there. That's it for this episode of The Briefing. We'd love it if you could share this app with someone you think might enjoy it. And if you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. Just search Listener Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed tomorrow from 6. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you next time.